What if I told you that a $1 billion Chinese deal in Zambia just exposed something the world wasn't supposed to know? That former President Edgar Lungu's family may have played a role in secret negotiations, and now the US is watching closely. Why is Washington furious about this China-Zambia deal? What hidden contracts did Lungu's inner circle allegedly benefit from? And how is President Hakainde Hichilema responding under pressure from both East and West? This is more than just a road project. This is a battle for control between China, the US, and a small African nation caught in the middle. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear could change how you see African politics forever. Did the Lungu family secretly benefit from China's massive $1 billion road project in Zambia? In this exclusive exposé, we uncover the untold connections between former President Edgar Lungu's family and the controversial Chinese deal that's making the US furious. Learn how international pressure is building and why this project could reshape Africa's future, politically, economically, and diplomatically. Key topics covered: China's $1 billion road project and hidden clauses, Lungu family's alleged involvement and past influence, US and Western reaction, sanctions or silence, impact on Zambia's economy, sovereignty, and global alliances. Subscribe for more in-depth political analysis across Africa. Brought to you by Inspire Africa Official, Zambia's trusted source for real news. The $1 billion China-Zambia road project, specifically the Lusaka-Ndola dual carriageway, is a significant infrastructure initiative under China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) in Zambia. Announced in 2017, the project was intended to enhance connectivity between Zambia's capital, Lusaka, and Ndola, the hub of the Copperbelt region, a critical economic area due to Zambia's status as Africa's second-largest copper producer. This project, executed by the China-Jiangxi Corporation for International Economic and Technical Cooperation (CJIC), has been a focal point of discussion regarding Zambia's economic development, its deepening ties with China, and the implications of foreign debt. The questions posed about who signed the deal, the Lungu family's involvement, US government discoveries, China's agenda, Zambia's future, and whether the project was worth it, require a nuanced exploration of political, economic, and geopolitical dynamics. This analysis aims to provide a thorough examination, critically assessing the available evidence while addressing the complexities of Zambia's relationship with China and other global powers. Who really signed the deal? Background on the Lusaka-Ndola dual carriageway. The Lusaka-Ndola dual carriageway project, valued at $1.2 billion, was announced on September 8, 2017 by then Zambian President Edgar Lungu. The contract was awarded to the China-Jiangxi Corporation for International Economic and Technical Cooperation (CJIC) to construct a 321-kilometer dual carriageway linking Lusaka to Ndola over 4 years. The project was part of Zambia's broader infrastructure development agenda, particularly the Link Zambia 8000 plan, which aimed to pave thousands of kilometers of roads to modernize the country's transport network. The announcement came during a period of significant Chinese investment in Zambia, with projects spanning roads, energy, mining, and agriculture, supported by loans from Chinese institutions like the Export-Import Bank of China (Exim Bank). Official signatories. Officially, the deal was formalized between the Zambian government and CJIC, with President Edgar Lungu presiding over the launch ceremony. As head of state, Lungu's role was ceremonial and symbolic, representing the Zambian government's commitment to the project. The actual contractual agreements would have involved key government officials, likely from the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Infrastructure, though specific names of signatories are not detailed in public records. The Zambian Road Development Agency (RDA) and the Ministry of Housing and Infrastructure Development were responsible for overseeing road projects, and their representatives would have been involved in negotiations. On the Chinese side, CJIC executives, backed by financing from Chinese policy banks like Exim Bank, would have signed the contract. The lack of transparency in the exact signatories reflects a broader issue in Zambia's loan contracting process, which critics argue has often bypassed parliamentary oversight. Political context and decision-making. The decision to pursue the Lusaka-Ndola project was driven by the Patriotic Front (PF) government under Lungu, which prioritized infrastructure to boost economic growth and political capital. The project was seen as a flagship initiative to improve traffic flow, reduce road accidents, and stimulate economic activity in the Copperbelt, a politically significant region. However, the centralized nature of decision-making under Lungu's administration raised concerns. A 2012 Zambian report highlighted public expectations for paved roads, and Lungu's government capitalized on this by securing large loans, including the $287 million from Chinese Exim Bank for earlier road projects under the Link Zambia 8000 plan. The 2017 deal was an extension of this strategy, but the lack of parliamentary approval for such loans, as noted in some analyses, suggests that Lungu and his close aides, including the Minister of Finance, played a dominant role in finalizing the agreement. Transparency issues. Critics, including Zambian media outlet Newsdiggers, have pointed out that some Chinese loans, including those for infrastructure, were not fully disclosed, with official figures underrepresenting the total debt due to unstarted projects. This opacity has fueled speculation about who truly benefited from the deal. While Lungu's public announcement framed the project as a national priority, the lack of detailed public records on the contract's terms and signatories has led to accusations of secretive dealings, potentially involving Lungu's inner circle rather than broad governmental consensus. Conclusion on signatories. While President Edgar Lungu was the public face of the deal, the actual signatories likely included senior officials from Zambia's Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Infrastructure, alongside CJIC representatives. The centralized decision-making process under Lungu's administration, coupled with limited transparency, obscures the full picture of who was directly involved. The project's announcement aligned with Lungu's political agenda to showcase infrastructure development, but the lack of parliamentary oversight raises questions about accountability. How was the Lungu family involved? Edgar Lungu's role and administration. Edgar Lungu, Zambia's president from 2015 to 2021, was central to the country's infrastructure push, including the Lusaka-Ndola dual carriageway. His administration's reliance on Chinese loans to fund projects like roads, airports, and energy facilities was a hallmark of his tenure. Lungu's public statements framed these projects as part of his legacy, as seen in his farewell speech in August 2021, where he highlighted infrastructure achievements like the Simon Mwanza Kapwepwe International Airport, also financed by China. However, direct evidence of personal financial involvement by Lungu or his immediate family in the $1.2 billion road project is limited and largely speculative, based on allegations of corruption and mismanagement. Allegations of corruption involving Lungu's associates. One notable case linked to Lungu's administration involves Haibin Mwinga, his economic advisor, who was arrested in 2022 by Zambia's Anti-Corruption Commission over the source of funding for multiple properties he owned. While this incident does not directly tie Mwinga to the Lusaka-Ndola project, it reflects broader concerns about corruption within Lungu's inner circle during his presidency. The lack of transparency in loan agreements, as noted by sources like the Brookings Institution, which estimated that Chinese loans accounted for 65.8% of Zambia's external debt, fueled suspicions that Lungu's associates may have benefited from inflated contracts or kickbacks. Family involvement. Speculation versus evidence. There is no concrete evidence in the provided sources directly implicating Lungu's immediate family, e.g. his wife or children, in the Lusaka-Ndola project. However, Zambia's political environment under Lungu was marked by accusations of cronyism. For example, the rapper Pilato's song, Yama Chinese, criticized the government for selling Zambia to China, reflecting public sentiment that Lungu's administration prioritized foreign interests over national ones. Such criticisms often extended to allegations that Lungu's family or close allies benefited indirectly from infrastructure deals through business connections or political patronage. Broader context of Lungu's governance. Lungu's government faced accusations of democratic backsliding, with Amnesty International noting a crackdown on opposition leaders, journalists, and activists. This environment of centralized power and limited accountability created fertile ground for speculation about personal enrichment. The China-Africa Research Initiative estimated Zambia's debt to China at $6.6 billion, nearly twice what Lungu's government publicly acknowledged, suggesting secretive borrowing practices. This opacity could imply that Lungu's family or associates had opportunities to benefit from contracts, though no specific evidence ties them to the $1.2 billion project. Public perception and political fallout. The Lungu administration's heavy borrowing from China, including for the Lusaka-Ndola project, contributed to Zambia's default on a Eurobond payment in 2020, making it the first African country to default during the COVID-19 pandemic. This economic mismanagement, coupled with allegations of corruption, played a significant role in Lungu's electoral defeat in August 2021 to Hakainde Hichilema. Public discontent, as voiced by figures like Pilato, highlighted fears that infrastructure projects enriched elites rather than benefiting ordinary Zambians. Conclusion on Lungu family involvement. While Edgar Lungu was directly associated with the Lusaka-Ndola project as president, there is no definitive evidence that his immediate family was involved in the deal. Allegations of corruption focus more on Lungu's associates like Haibin Mwinga and the broader lack of transparency in loan agreements. Public perception and political rhetoric, amplified by songs and protests, fueled suspicions of family enrichment, but these remain largely unsubstantiated in the context of this specific project. What did the U.S. government discover? U.S. concerns about Chinese lending. The U.S. government has expressed significant concerns about China's lending practices in Africa, particularly in Zambia, framing them as part of debt trap diplomacy. A 2020 State Department document, The Elements of the China Challenge, accused China of using predatory loans to ensnare developing nations, though it did not provide specific evidence for Zambia. U.S. officials, including Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who visited Lusaka in January 2023, highlighted the economic suffering caused by Zambia's debt crisis and the stalled restructuring process. Yellen emphasized that debt relief should not be used to repay Chinese loans, indicating U.S. scrutiny of Zambia's financial ties with China. Discoveries related to Zambia's debt. The U.S. government, through its diplomatic and financial engagements, has focused on Zambia's debt transparency issues. The China-Africa Research Initiative noted that Zambia's debt to China was approximately $6.6 billion, nearly twice what Lungu's government publicly acknowledged, suggesting hidden loans. This discovery, while not exclusively attributed to U.S. efforts, aligns with U.S. concerns about opaque lending practices. The U.S. has pushed for greater transparency in Zambia's debt restructuring, particularly under the G20 Common Framework, where China and France co-chair the Creditors Committee. Specific U.S. findings on the road project. There are no direct U.S. government findings specifically tied to the $1.2 billion Lusaka-Ndola project in the provided sources. However, broader U.S. concerns about Chinese infrastructure projects in Zambia include the risk of overborrowing and the potential for strategic asset control. For example, a 2019 report noted U.S. concerns about the Kafue Gorge Hydroelectric Dam, a $1.5 billion Chinese-funded project, and its implications for Zambia's state power utility, ZESCO. Similar concerns could apply to the road project, given its scale and financing by Chinese Exim Bank. U.S. role in debt restructuring. The U.S. has actively supported Zambia's debt restructuring efforts, particularly through the IMF and the G20 Common Framework. Yellen's visit to Lusaka underscored the need for private creditors like BlackRock to agree to debt relief, as they hold significant portions of Zambia's $6.8 billion in private loans. The U.S. has also criticized China's reluctance to accept haircuts on loan principals, as noted in a Rhodium Group report, which highlighted China's preference for extending loan terms rather than reducing debt amounts. These findings suggest that the U.S. views China's lending practices as a barrier to Zambia's economic recovery. Conclusion on U.S. discoveries. The U.S. government has not publicly released specific findings about the Lusaka-Ndola Road project, but has highlighted broader issues with Zambia's Chinese debt, including lack of transparency and unsustainable borrowing. The discovery of hidden loans, estimated at $6.6 billion, aligns with U.S. concerns about China's lending practices. Through diplomatic efforts and support for IMF-led restructuring, the U.S. has pushed for accountability, indirectly influencing the scrutiny of projects like the Lusaka-Ndola Carriageway. China's hidden agenda in Zambia. Context of China-Zambia relations. China's relationship with Zambia dates back to the 1970s, with projects like the Tanzania-Zambia Railway, TAZARA. The BRI, launched in 2013, intensified this engagement, with Zambia becoming a key recipient of Chinese loans for infrastructure, totaling $6.6 billion by 2020. The Lusaka-Ndola project is part of this broader strategy to enhance connectivity and economic ties. However, critics, particularly in the West, have accused China of pursuing a hidden agenda through debt trap diplomacy, alleging that loans are designed to ensnare countries in debt to gain strategic control over assets or influence. Debt trap diplomacy, myth or reality? The debt trap narrative, popularized by Western analysts, suggests that China deliberately lends to countries like Zambia to create unsustainable debt, allowing China to seize assets or exert geopolitical influence. A 2020 State Department document explicitly referenced this concern. However, scholars like Deborah Brottigam argue that there is scant evidence of China intentionally inducing debt to seize assets. In Zambia's case, China has canceled $259 million in debt since 2000, more than any other creditor, and has not been linked to asset seizures. Instead, the debt crisis is attributed to both Chinese and Zambian mismanagement, including poor project planning and lack of oversight. Strategic interests in Zambia. China's interests in Zambia are multifaceted. Economic access. Zambia's copper reserves are a key attraction as China seeks resources for its industrial needs. The Copperbelt's significance makes projects like the Lusaka-Ndola Carriageway strategic for facilitating resource transport. Geopolitical influence. The BRI aims to enhance China's global influence. In Zambia, projects like roads and airports strengthen bilateral ties, positioning China as a key partner over Western nations. Soft power. China's investments, such as the $60 million conference center in Lusaka, are framed as gifts to build goodwill. However, ventures like the 60% stake in Zambia's national broadcaster, ZNBC, through Topstar, have raised concerns about media influence. Evidence of a hidden agenda. While the debt trap narrative lacks conclusive evidence, specific practices raise concerns. Opaque lending. The lack of transparency in loan agreements, as noted by newsdiggers, suggests that some loans were not publicly disclosed, potentially allowing China to exert influence behind closed doors. Collateral concerns. Reports from EXX Africa suggested that Chinese firms sought control of Zambian mining assets as collateral for loan defaults, though no seizures have been documented. Bureaucratic pressure. Chinese loan approvals involve multiple agencies, creating pressure on Zambia to accept terms without thorough evaluation, leading to poorly planned projects. Counter-arguments. Scholars argue that China's lending is driven by commercial interests and bureaucratic inefficiencies, rather than a calculated conspiracy. The multiplicity of Chinese lenders, 18 in Zambia, and contractors, 29, indicates fragmented decision-making rather than a unified agenda. Zambia's own governance issues, including Lungu's centralized borrowing and disregard for debt sustainability, contributed significantly to the crisis. Conclusion on China's agenda. China's agenda in Zambia appears to be a mix of economic self-interest, geopolitical positioning, and soft power projection, rather than a deliberate debt trap strategy. The Lusaka-Ndola project aligns with China's goal of improving infrastructure to access resources and markets, but opaque lending practices and Zambia's mismanagement have amplified debt risks. While no evidence confirms asset seizures or overt control, the lack of transparency fuels suspicions of hidden motives. Zambia's future: prosperity or debt trap? Economic context. Zambia's economy, heavily reliant on copper exports, faced significant challenges by 2020, with a debt-to-GDP ratio projected at 96% and a default on a Eurobond payment. The Lusaka project, while aimed at boosting connectivity and economic activity, added to the debt burden. The question of whether Zambia faces prosperity or a debt trap hinges on its ability to manage debt, leverage infrastructure for growth, and navigate global financial systems. Prosperity potential. The Lusaka carriageway could drive economic benefits. Improved connectivity. The project connects Lusaka to the Copperbelt, facilitating trade and reducing transport costs. Lungu claimed it would create over 3,000 jobs during construction and reduce road accidents. Economic growth. Infrastructure investments can increase productivity through scale and network effects, as noted in academic literature. The Copperbelt's role in copper production makes the road critical for export efficiency. Debt restructuring success. Under President Hakainde Hichilema, Zambia secured a $6.3 billion debt restructuring deal with China and other creditors in 2023, followed by a bondholder agreement in 2024. These deals, coupled with a $1.3 billion IMF loan, provide fiscal space for economic recovery. Debt trap risks. Despite potential benefits, significant risks remain. High debt levels. Zambia's $6.6 billion debt to China and $6.8 billion to private creditors strain its finances. The cancellation of $1.6 billion in undisbursed Chinese loans, including some for road projects, reflects efforts to mitigate this risk, but the overall debt burden remains high. IMF conditions. The IMF deal requires ending fuel and agricultural subsidies, impacting poorer Zambians, and demands transparency in future borrowing. These austerity measures could hinder short-term social welfare. Dependency on copper. Zambia's lack of economic diversification, a legacy of colonial underdevelopment, makes it vulnerable to commodity price fluctuations. Hichilema's reforms. Since taking office in 2021, Hichilema has prioritized debt sustainability and economic reform. Debt management. The establishment of a debt management office and a public debt management bill requiring parliamentary approval aim to prevent future overborrowing. Private sector engagement. Hichilema's push for public-private partnerships, PPPs, and joint ventures with foreign investors seeks to maximize local benefits from projects like the Lusaka Road. Economic stabilization. Inflation dropped from 24.4% in 2021 to 9.4% under Hichilema, signaling improved economic management. Long-term outlook. Zambia's future depends on balancing infrastructure benefits with debt management. The Lusaka project could enhance economic activity if completed and maintained effectively, but its high cost and initial financing challenges highlight the risks of over-reliance on foreign loans. Hichilema's reforms and international support offer a path to prosperity, but structural issues like copper dependency and global economic volatility pose ongoing challenges. Conclusion on Zambia's future. Zambia stands at a crossroads. The Lusaka project has the potential to drive prosperity by improving connectivity and supporting the copper industry, but the debt-incurred risks entrenching a cycle of dependency. Hichilema's leadership and international debt relief efforts provide hope, but sustained reforms and economic diversification are critical to avoiding a debt trap. 6. Final verdict. Was it worth it? Evaluating costs and benefits. Assessing whether the $1.2 billion Lusaka project was worth it requires weighing its economic, social, and political impacts against its financial costs and risks. Benefits. Infrastructure improvement. The dual carriageway aims to reduce travel time, improve safety, and enhance trade between Lusaka and the Copperbelt. Lungu's claim of 3,000 jobs during construction suggests short-term economic stimulus. Strategic importance. As part of the Link Zambia 8000 plan, the project aligns with national development goals to modernize infrastructure, potentially attracting investment. Regional connectivity. Linking Zambia to the Democratic Republic of Congo and southern African neighbors enhances Zambia's role in regional trade networks. Costs and risks. Debt burden. The project's $1.2 billion cost, financed by Chinese loans, contributed to Zambia's $6.6 billion debt to China, exacerbating the 2020 default. Transparency issues. The lack of public disclosure and parliamentary parliamentary oversight raised concerns about mismanagement and potential corruption. Economic returns. The IMF noted that Zambia's infrastructure spending, including on roads, has not yielded sufficient economic growth or fiscal revenues, casting doubt on the project's value. Public and political perspectives. Public sentiment, as reflected in Pilato's music and protests, viewed Chinese-funded projects with skepticism, fearing they benefited elites or foreign interests more than ordinary Zambians. Politically, the project bolstered Lungu's image as a development-focused leader, but contributed to his electoral loss due to the debt crisis. Hichilema's cancellation of $1.6 billion in undisbursed Chinese loans, including some road projects, suggests a reassessment of their viability. Long-term impact. The project's long-term worth depends on its completion and utilization. If the carriageway drives economic activity and is maintained effectively, it could justify its cost. However, the debt incurred and the lack of immediate returns highlight the challenges of large-scale borrowing without robust economic planning. Conclusion on work. The Lusaka-Ndola dual carriageway has potential to enhance Zambia's infrastructure and economy, but its high cost, lack of transparency, and contribution to the debt crisis raise serious concerns. Without evidence of significant economic returns, and given the financial strain it imposed, the project's worth remains questionable. Zambia's focus on debt restructuring and economic reform under Hichilema suggests a cautious approach to future projects, emphasizing sustainability over ambition. Conclusion. The $1.2 billion China-Zambia road project encapsulates the complexities of Zambia's development aspirations and its relationship with China. Edgar Lungu was the public face of the deal, but opacity in the contracting process obscures the full picture of signatories. Allegations of Lungu family involvement remain speculative, tied to broader corruption concerns rather than specific evidence. The U.S. has highlighted transparency issues and pushed for debt relief, reflecting concerns about China's lending practices. China's agenda appears driven by economic and geopolitical interests rather than a deliberate debt trap, though opaque practices fuel suspicions. Zambia's future hinges on leveraging infrastructure like the Lusaka-Ndola Road while managing debt and diversifying its economy. Ultimately, the project's worth is uncertain, with potential benefits overshadowed by financial risks and governance challenges. Zambia's ongoing reforms offer hope, but careful management is essential to ensure prosperity over a debt trap.